a young girl from a small town in Vermont, left for school and never returned, shattering her parents' world with grief and uncertainty. But 2 years later, her mother happened to zoom in on a map on Google Maps and discovered something shocking. Her son had accidentally glimpsed a figure behind the curtains of a modest Airbnb apartment on the outskirts of Boston one Sunday afternoon. Emma Collins sat on the sofa in the living room, her laptop resting on the coffee table, eyes heavy from the long journey from Vermont. At 34, she bore the weariness of someone who had endured 2 years of pain. "Yes, we just arrived in Boston," her husband Mark said on the phone, pacing the small living room. At 37, Mark's once youthful face was now marked with deep worry lines accumulated over those 2 years. "We're ready to start the investigation. We can head to the police station today." Emma barely heard his conversation with the police, focusing instead on the laptop screen as she typed in the address Mark had just repeated. Google Maps quickly loaded the route from their Airbnb to the nearby police station. "They said they'll wait for us for about an hour," Mark said, running his hand through his salt and pepper hair as he ended the call. "I'm just looking at this area," Emma murmured, zooming in and out on the map. They were unfamiliar with Boston. Their home was in Willow Creek, a peaceful small town in Vermont, where everyone knew each other, where children could walk to school alone, where tragedies like this simply didn't happen until it did. 2 years earlier, their daughter Abigail had disappeared after attending a church youth meeting. The late afternoon sun, like a painter brushing soft golds and long shadows, streamed through the stained glass windows of St. Michael's Church in Havenwood, Oregon. Abigail, an 8-year-old with bright blue eyes usually sparkling with mischief, sat unusually still in the front pew, intently listening to the children's catechism lesson. Her mother Clara sat a few rows back, a gentle smile playing on her lips. Abigail's vibrant red winter coat, a recent gift, made her stand out like a poppy in a muted winter landscape. It was an ordinary Tuesday, the kind of day that lulls one into a false sense of security, only to later be scrutinized for missed signs. The lesson ended with a prayer. The small group of children, no more than 10, began gathering their things. Clara caught Abigail's eye and gave a small wave, mouthing, "5 more minutes, sweetie," signaling that she needed to finalize some volunteer arrangements with Mrs. Peterson, the parish secretary. Abigail nodded, flashing a gap-toothed smile before turning to chat with her friend Lily. Clara's conversation with Mrs. Peterson stretched longer than expected, from volunteer schedules to bake sales, then to the upcoming visit of the guest bishop, Alistair Finch, renowned for his powerful sermons. When Clara finally returned 10 or 15 minutes later, the small hall adjacent to the chapel, where the children usually waited, was nearly empty. Parents were gathering their bundled-up children, the air filled with cheerful goodbyes. Clara scanned the room. No Abigail. A knot of unease tightened in her stomach. "Lily?" she called to Abigail's friend, who was zipping up her purple coat. "Have you seen Abigail?" Lily, a cherubic girl with pigtails, looked around. "She said she was going to the restroom, Mrs. Donovan, a little while ago." Clara's worry deepened. The church restrooms were just down a short hallway. She hurried, her footsteps echoing loudly in the suddenly silent building. "Abigail!" she called, voice bright but trembling. The restroom door was slightly ajar. She pushed it open. Empty. She checked each stolonly porcelain, and silence. A cold panic prickled at the edges of her composure. "Abigail?" Her voice grew louder, quivering. She retraced her steps, eyes darting into every nook and shadowed doorway. Mrs. Peterson, noticing Clara's distress, approached. "Is everything all right, Clara?" "I can't find Abigail. Lily said she went to the restroom, but she's not there." "Oh." Together they searched the small parish hall and then the main chapel, calling for Abigail with mounting urgency. The few remaining parents and children joined in, their initial casual concern turning into shared anxiety. The vast space of St. Michael's, usually a place of solace, now felt menacing. Marcus, Clara's husband, arrived minutes later, summoned by a frantic call from Mrs. Peterson. His usually smiling face was etched with bewildered fear as Clara choked out the details. Father Michael, the kindly elderly priest, had been in his study and noticed nothing amiss. The police were called. The quiet town of Havenwood, where doors were often left unlocked and children roamed freely, was shaken. Officers arrived with calm professionalism, contrasting the rising tide of parental terror. They questioned everyone, Had anyone seen a little girl in a bright red coat leaving alone? Had any strangers been lurking? No one had. It was as if Abigail had vanished into thin air from the sacred grounds of St. Michael's. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting an early twilight over Havenwood. Floodlights illuminated the church grounds, the adjacent cemetery, and nearby woods. Volunteers, their breath misting in the chilly Oregon air, spread out, flashlights cutting desperate arcs through the darkness. Clara, wrapped in a borrowed blanket, sat numbly on the church steps, Marcus's arm a heavy, grounding presence around her shoulders. Every distant shout, every rustle of leaves, sent a jolt of agonizing hope through her only to be extinguished by the deafening silence of Abigail's absence. Days bled into weeks. The frantic initial search gave way to a grim, methodical routine. Posters bearing Abigail's smiling face and red coat symbols of lost innocence were plastered on every storefront and telephone pole in Havenwood and beyond. Detectives followed every lead, no matter how tenuous. Psychics called with visions. Well-meaning neighbors offered theories. The redcoat was never found. No witnesses. No ransom note. Nothing. Clara and Marcus's lives unraveled. Sleep became a battleground of nightmares and restless waking. Food tasted like ash. Marcus threw himself into coordinating volunteer efforts, grief a raw kinetic force. Clara, quieter and more internal, replayed those final moments at St. Michael's 1,000 times, torturing herself with what-ifs. What if she hadn't stayed to talk to Mrs. Peterson? What if she'd kept Abigail by her side? Community support was immense but waned with time. Life had to go on for others. Posters faded and tore. News crews packed up. But for Clara and Marcus, time fractured on that cold Tuesday afternoon. 2 years, 730 days of agony became a constant companion. Hope, once a blazing fire, was now a fragile ember. Clara shielded fiercely, while Marcus's seemed to flicker and dim, replaced by quiet despair. They exhausted local leads, hired private investigators, appealed on national television. Nothing. Then, a whisper. An anonymous, untraceable, vague email. A girl like yours. Mariners Green. Port Providence. Port Providence, Washington, bustling coastal city hours away. Probably a cruel hoax or well-intended mistake. Marcus was weary, reluctant to chase another ghost. But Clara clung to it. It was something. So, they found themselves in a sterile Airbnb in Port Providence, the unfamiliar city's hum stark against Havenwood's quiet sorrow. 2 years after Abigail vanished from the house of God, Clara felt an unshakable, terrifying conviction. Their search was not over. It couldn't be. Somewhere, her daughter was waiting. The Port Providence Airbnb was small, impersonally furnished, and smelled faintly of stale coffee and the previous occupants' lingering anxieties. For Clara, it was a temporary war room, a base of operations in a city that felt alien and overwhelming. Marcus, quieter than Clara had ever known him, moved through the space like a ghost, his shoulders perpetually slumped, the lines around his eyes deeper than his 40 years should have allowed. He'd agreed to this trip, this pursuit of another flimsy lead, more for Clara's sake than from any real conviction of his own. 2 years of dead ends had eroded his hope to its foundations. Mariners Green, Clara murmured, her laptop open on the small kitchen table. She'd been up since before dawn, fueled by a nervous energy that was equal parts dread and a desperate, defiant optimism. It's a large park, right on the waterfront, lots of public events, according to the city website. Marcus grunted from the sofa, where he was staring blankly at a local news channel. Homeless outreach programs, too. The email was specific about that. The anonymous tip had mentioned a girl matching Eliza's description, or rather, what Eliza might look like now, at 10 years old, seen at a food distribution event for the homeless near Mariners Green. It was painfully vague, the kind of lead that could apply to countless children in a city this size. Clara navigated to GeoView, the online mapping service, typing in the address of their Airbnb. She wanted to get a feel for the area, for the route to Mariners Green, for the city's layout. The satellite images resolved, showing sprawling urban blocks, the glittering expanse of the bay, and the emerald splash of the park itself. "We should go to the park first," Marcus said, his voice flat. "See if anyone from the outreach groups remembers anything. Then, the police station. Give them the email." Clara nodded, her fingers moving almost automatically across the touchpad, zooming in on Mariner's Green. She traced the digital pathways, the streets that bordered the park. Her gaze was meticulous, a habit honed by 2 years of scrutinizing every photograph, every snippet of information, for a trace of Eliza. She wasn't consciously looking for anything specific on the map, just trying to orient herself, to prepare. She clicked on the streetscape icon, the little blue figure appearing on the screen. She dragged it to a road bordering the eastern edge of Mariner's Green, the digital world resolving into a panoramic, ground-level view. Cars were parked along the curb, blurry figures of pedestrians mid-stride. She walked the digital street block by block, her eyes scanning the storefronts, the building facades, the general atmosphere of the neighborhood. "This area looks a bit rougher than I expected," she commented, more to herself than to Marcus. He didn't reply, lost in his own bleak thoughts. Clara continued her virtual exploration, moving away from the immediate vicinity of the park, her curiosity leading her down side streets. She wasn't sure why, but she felt a strange compulsion to see more than just their target destination. Perhaps it was a way of asserting some control in a situation where she felt utterly powerless. She turned onto a narrower street, Anchor Lane, according to the digital overlay. It was lined with older, mixed-use buildings, small businesses on the ground floor, apartments above. A few blocks down, she saw the distinct shape of a church, its stone facade weathered, a modest steeple pointing skyward. Churches. They had become complicated symbols for Clara. St. Ferry, Michael's, once a sanctuary, was now the epicenter of her trauma. Yet her faith, though battered and bruised, still flickered. As she approached the church on Anchor Lane, her finger paused on the touchpad. The GeoView car must have passed by on a relatively clear day. The images were sharp. Her eyes, trained by grief to seek out the familiar in the unfamiliar, snagged on something. 2 figures walking away from the camera, their backs to the GeoView car, a tall adult and a child. The child was small, wearing. Clara's breath caught in her throat. A coat, a vibrant, unmistakable blue. Not red, like Eliza's last seen coat, but this particular shade of sapphire blue was one Eliza had adored. Clara had bought her a lighter spring jacket in that exact color just before her 9th birthday, a birthday Eliza never got to celebrate at home. It had a distinctive silver zipper pull, shaped like a star. "Marcus," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He didn't stir. "Marcus, look." Her voice was sharper now, laced with an urgency that finally pierced his apathy. He sighed, heaving himself off the sofa and shuffling over to the table. "What is it, Clara? Another false alarm?" His tone was weary, but he peered at the screen. Clara's finger trembled as she pointed. "That girl, the blue coat, it looks like the one I bought for Eliza, for her birthday." Marcus leaned closer, squinting. The figures were a little grainy, their faces completely obscured as they walked away. The adult was tall, male, dressed in dark clothing. The child was slight. "Clara, honey," Marcus began gently, "it's a blue coat. There are millions of blue coats. But this shade, Marcus, and look at the way she walks, the set of her shoulders." It was a flimsy observation, born more of desperate hope than concrete evidence. The GeoView image captured only a fleeting moment, a random slice of life from months, maybe even a year or 2 ago, whenever the GeoView car had last mapped this street. "We can't see her face, Clara. We can't even be sure how old that image is. It could be anyone." I know, she conceded, frustration welling. But her heart was hammering. There was something about it. An instinct, sharp and insistent, the same instinct that had kept her going when all logic dictated surrender. "That church? St. Jude's, it says." She zoomed in on a small, partially obscured sign on the church building. "Okay," Marcus said, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. "Okay, it's on the way to Mariner's Green, more or less. We can drive by." "But Clara, please, don't get your hopes up. We've been down this road so many times." "I know," she repeated, but her eyes remained fixed on the pixelated image of the small figure in the blue coat, walking away, oblivious, into the digital abyss. A flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long, long time. Not hope exactly, but a terrifying, electrifying premonition coursed through her. This felt different. This felt significant. She saved the GeoView coordinates, her mind racing. The anonymous tip had pointed to Mariners Green, but this image on Anchor Lane near St. Jude's Church felt like a magnetic pull, an unexpected detour on a map already fraught with uncertainty. The silence in the small Airbnb room was thick with unspoken emotions. Clara's burgeoning, fragile anticipation and Marcus's heavy, protective skepticism. He didn't want to see her hurt again, didn't want to witness the crushing disappointment that always followed these flickers of perceived hope, but Clara couldn't ignore it. For 2 years, she had lived in a world of shadows. This, however faint, was a pinprick of light, and she had to walk towards it. The drive to Anchor Lane was tense. Clara navigated using her phone, her knuckles white on the steering wheel of their rental car. Marcus sat beside her, a silent statue of resignation, his gaze fixed on the unfamiliar Port Providence streetscape. Each passing blue coat on a distant pedestrian sent a jolt through Clara, a Pavlovian response conditioned by years of desperate searching. Anchor Lane was much as it had appeared on GeoView, a narrow, slightly worn artery of the city, lined with brick buildings that had seen better days. Small, independent shops displayed faded signs, their windows dusty. It felt a world away from the polished veneer of the city center or the manicured lawns of Havenwood. St. Jude's Church loomed into view, a modest structure of gray stone, its steeple more functional than ornate. It had an air of quiet endurance, a steadfast presence amidst the urban decay. A few cars were parked in the small adjoining lot. "Okay, we're here," Marcus said, his voice devoid of inflection. "Let's just take a quick look from the car, Clara. Then we go to Mariners Green." But Clara was already unbuckling her seatbelt. "I want to go inside, Marcus. Just for a moment." "Inside? Why? What do you expect to find?" "I don't know," she admitted, her hand on the door handle. "A feeling. That GeoView image. It was right here. Maybe someone remembers something. Maybe they have a community board with old photos." It sounded weak, even to her own ears. Marcus sighed, a sound heavy with 2 years of accumulated weariness. "All right, Clara. 5 minutes, then we leave." They stepped out into the cool, damp air. The sounds of the city seemed muffled here, a distant roar. Clara felt a strange sense of trepidation, mixed with an almost feverish anticipation as she approached the heavy wooden doors of St. Jude's. This was it, the place from the image. The interior of the church was dimly lit, sunlight filtering weakly through simple, unadorned stained glass windows. It smelled of old wood, beeswax, and the faint, lingering scent of incense. A handful of people were scattered amongst the pews, heads bowed in private prayer. An elderly woman was lighting candles near a side altar. A man in clerical attire, not the elaborate vestments Clara associated with high church services, but a simple black shirt and a Roman collar, was arranging hymnals at the back. He looked up as they entered, a welcoming, if somewhat surprised, smile on his face. He appeared to be in his late 50s, with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor. "Good morning," he said, his voice soft. "Welcome to St. Jude's Quote and Aid. Can I help you?" "Good morning, Father," Clara began. "Reverend Davies," he supplied. "And you are?" "Clara Donovan. And this is my husband, Marcus." "A pleasure. Are you new to the area?" Clara hesitated, then plunged in. "Not exactly. We're here. We're looking for our daughter, Eliza. She's been missing for 2 years." The words, though spoken countless times, still felt like shards of glass in her throat. Reverend Davies's smile faltered, replaced by an expression of deep sympathy. "Oh, my dear, I am so terribly sorry. That is an unimaginable burden to bear." Marcus shifted uncomfortably beside her. He hated these moments, the pitying looks, the awkward condolences. "We saw an image," Clara pressed on, pulling out her phone and navigating to the saved GeoView screenshot. "On your mapping service. It was taken on this street, right outside your church. It showed a little girl in a blue coat with an adult. She held out the phone. The image was small, pixelated. I know it's a long shot, a very long shot. But my daughter had a coat just like that. Does this look familiar at all? The child or the adult?" Reverend Davies took the phone, squinting at the screen. He studied it for a long moment, his brow furrowed. "It's difficult to tell, Mrs. Donovan. The quality isn't very good, and their backs are to the camera. And these images can be quite old. Do you know when it was taken?" "No, unfortunately." He handed the phone back with a sigh. "I wish I could be more help. We have many families. Many children pass through our doors. A blue coat, it's common." He paused. "But there is someone here today who might have a sharper memory for faces, or perhaps knows the regular congregation better. We have a guest, a visiting bishop, Bishop Alistair Finch. He's renowned, actually. He was just concluding a brief retreat and sermon series here. He's in the sacristy, preparing to leave." The name sent a strange shiver down Clara's spine. Bishop Alistair Finch. The name Mrs. Peterson had mentioned back in Havenwood, the guest clergyman who was due to visit St. Michael's shortly after Eliza disappeared. A coincidence, surely. "Perhaps," Reverend Davies continued. "If you showed him the picture, he has a remarkable presence, very observant." Before Clara could process this, a door at the side of the chancel opened, and a tall, imposing figure emerged. He was dressed in the more formal attire of a bishop, a purple cassock, a pectoral cross glinting on his chest. He had silver hair, swept back from a high forehead, and piercing blue eyes that seemed to survey the small church with an air of benign authority. He was, Clara had to admit, strikingly charismatic. This was Bishop Alistair Finch. Reverend Davies gestured. "Bishop Finch, might I trouble you for a moment? These are Mr. and Mrs. Donovan. They are searching for their missing daughter." Bishop Finch glided towards them, his expression one of serene compassion. "My children," he said, his voice rich and resonant, like a perfectly tuned cello. "Any burden you carry, you do not carry alone in the eyes of God. Tell me, how can I be of service?" Clara, feeling a renewed surge of adrenaline, explained again, her voice trembling slightly as she held out her phone with the GeoView image. "Our daughter Eliza, 2 years ago. This image? The blue coat?" Bishop Finch took the phone, his gaze, surprisingly intense, fixing on the small screen. For a fleeting second, Clara thought she saw something flicker in those serene blue eyes, a tightening around the pupils, a subtle tensing of his jawline. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by an expression of profound empathy. "A terrible cross to bear," he murmured, handing the phone back. "The image is indistinct, I'm afraid. So many little lambs in God's flock. I pray daily for all lost children." He paused. "You said Havenwood, Oregon?" Clara nodded, surprised. "Yes. How did you know?" "Ah," he said, a gentle smile touching his lips. "I was scheduled to give a series of talks at St. Michael's there a couple of years ago. A tragic time, I recall hearing about the little girl who went missing just before my intended visit. My trip was, of course, postponed indefinitely, given the circumstances." "Eliza, was it? Such a beautiful name." His knowledge, his calm recollection, should have been reassuring. Instead, an inexplicable sense of unease prickled Clara's skin. "Yes, that was Eliza," Marcus confirmed, his voice hoarse. Bishop Finch extended his hands, placing one on Clara's shoulder and the other on Marcus's. "Let us pray together for a moment, for Eliza's safe return, for strength for you both." They stood in a small, impromptu circle of prayer, the bishop's resonant voice filling the quiet church, invoking blessings and divine guidance. Clara closed her eyes, trying to find comfort in the familiar ritual, but the unease lingered. When the prayer concluded, Bishop Finch looked at Clara, his blue eyes holding hers. "I must depart shortly for the airport, my child, but know that you and Eliza will be in my fervent prayers." He then did something unexpected. He drew Clara into a brief, paternal embrace. It was meant to be comforting, she knew. But as he held her, his cheek briefly brushing hers, she felt a strange rigidity in his arms, and for an instant, a scent, faint, almost imperceptible, but jarringly familiar. Lavender and vanilla. It was the specific, unique fragrance of a children's soap and lotion set Eliza had adored, a gift from her grandmother. Clara had bought it in bulk. Their house used to be filled with that gentle scent. He released her, his serene smile firmly in place. "May God guide your steps." Clara was momentarily speechless, the scent memory colliding with the bishop's pious demeanor. It was a common enough fragrance, she told herself, a coincidence. Yet, As Bishop Finch turned to bid farewell to Reverend Davies, Clara's gaze fell upon his leather satchel, resting on a nearby pew. A small, brightly colored luggage tag was attached to the handle, partially obscured. It looked like a child's drawing, laminated. "Thank you, Bishop," Marcus said, his voice heavy with the familiar weight of disappointment. Another dead end. Clara, however, felt a confusing whirlwind of emotions. The bishop's fleeting reaction to the photo, the almost forgotten connection to Havenwood, and now that scent, that tiny, almost imperceptible hint of lavender and vanilla. Her mind, already on high alert, seized on these fragments, trying to piece them into a coherent picture. Was she imagining things? Was grief making her paranoid, seeing shadows where there was only light? Bishop Alistair Finch was a man of God, respected, compassionate. Yet the image of the girl in the blue coat, right outside this very church, and the bishop's presence here, now, it felt like too many threads converging in one place. As they walked out of St. Jude's, leaving the bishop in conversation with Reverend Davies, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that she had just stood in the presence of something far more complex, and perhaps far more sinister, than a benevolent shepherd of the flock. The shadow she sensed was growing, not receding. Back in the rental car, the oppressive silence was broken only by the rhythmic click of Clara's pen against a notepad. She was jotting down every detail she could recall. Bishop Finch's name, his mention of St. Michael's, the fleeting scent of lavender and vanilla, the luggage tag. Each fragment felt like a breadcrumb, but she didn't yet know where the trail led. "Well, that was nothing," Marcus said, his voice flat as he started the engine. "Mariners Green next. Then the police. Let's just get this day over with." Clara didn't respond immediately. Her mind was racing. "Marcus?" she said finally, her voice tight with an intensity that made him glance at her. "That scent, lavender and vanilla. It was Eliza's soap, her special lotion. You remember?" Marcus frowned. "Vaguely. Clara, it's a common scent. Baby powder, kids' products. You're grasping at straws." "Maybe," she conceded, though her gut screamed otherwise. "But he was going to St. Michael's right after Eliza. He knew her name. He seemed... I don't know. There was something in his eyes when he saw the photo. He's a bishop, Clara. He deals with people, with tragedies. He probably has a good memory for details, for pastoral care. He was being sympathetic." "I want to follow him," Clara blurted out, the words surprising even herself. Marcus stared at her, his expression a mixture of disbelief and exasperation. "Follow him? Follow a bishop? Are you serious? Based on what? A smell? A look in his eyes? Clara, this is getting out of hand. We have a real lead, the tip about Mariners Green. We need to focus on that." "The tip is vague, Marcus. A girl like Eliza. This feels more specific. He said he was going to the airport. Which one? When is his flight? There's something not right here, I can feel it." Her intuition, that persistent inner voice that had been her only constant companion in this nightmare, was screaming, "No, Clara, absolutely not. We are not stalking a clergyman. We'll go to Mariners Green, talk to the police, show them the picture. Mention the bishop if you insist. Let them handle it if there's anything to handle." Marcus's tone was firm, final. Just then, Bishop Alistair Finch emerged from St. Jude's, carrying his leather satchel. He exchanged a few last words with Reverend Davies, then walked briskly towards a black sedan parked near the church entrance, a different car than the ones they had seen in the lot. He placed his satchel on the passenger seat, got in, and pulled out onto Anchor Lane, heading away from the city center. "He's leaving," Clara said, her voice urgent. "Marcus, please, just for a little while. If it's nothing, I'll drop it, I promise. We'll go straight to Mariners Green." The desperation in her voice, the wild, haunted look in her eyes, seemed to sway him. He hesitated, his jaw tight. He'd seen this look before, this unshakable conviction. Arguing was futile. With a heavy sigh that seemed to carry the weight of their shared sorrow, he nodded curtly. "Fine, a little while. But if this turns into another wild goose chase, Clara, so help me." Clara didn't wait for him to finish. She pulled out into traffic, keeping a safe distance behind the bishop's black sedan. The little while stretched into 20 minutes, then 30. The bishop drove steadily, not erratically, leading them away from the main thoroughfares into a quieter, more residential part of Port Providence, an area of older, Grander houses set back from the road, shrouded by mature trees. Finally, the sedan turned into a long driveway, disappearing behind a tall hedge. The property was large, the house itself barely visible from the road. A discreet sign near the entrance read, "The Gables Guest House, Private Retreats." "A guest house?" Marcus said, bewildered. "I thought he was going to the airport." "Maybe he's picking someone up?" Clara offered, her mind racing. She pulled their car over to the side of the road, a little way past the entrance, partially concealed by an overgrown lilac bush. We wait. Minutes ticked by, each one an eternity. The quiet suburban street was peaceful, birdsong the only sound. It felt surreal, this clandestine surveillance, born of a mother's desperate hunch. "This is ridiculous, Clara," Marcus muttered, rubbing his temples. "We're wasting precious time." Before Clara could reply, the gates of the Gables guest house opened again. Not the bishop's black sedan, but a dark gray minivan emerged, turning in the opposite direction from which they had come. Behind the wheel was a woman in a severe dark dress, her hair pulled back tightly. Beside her, in the passenger seat, was a young girl, perhaps 9 or 10 years old, with blonde pigtails. Her face was pale, her expression solemn. Clara's heart leaped, then plummeted. It wasn't Eliza. The hair color was wrong, the features different. This girl was smaller, slighter than Eliza would be now. The minivan drove past them, the woman driver glancing briefly in their direction without any sign of recognition. A wave of crushing disappointment washed over Clara. Tears pricked her eyes. Marcus was right. She was chasing shadows, her grief twisting coincidences into conspiracies. The scent, the GeoView image, the bishop, it was all just a desperate projection of her own unbearable longing. "See, Clara?" Marcus said, his voice gentle now, devoid of accusation, only a profound sadness. "It's not her. He probably has staff, other people he works with, families he ministers to. This is nothing." Clara nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She felt foolish, exposed. The fierce conviction that had propelled her just moments before now seemed like a symptom of her unraveling sanity. "Let's go," Marcus said softly. "Let's go to Mariners Green, and then the police." He reached over and squeezed her arm. "I know you want this to be something, sweetheart." "I do too, more than anything." As they drove away, Clara couldn't shake the image of the bishop's serene face, the scent of lavender and vanilla, the little girl in the blue coat on GeoView. Had she truly imagined it all? They were late for their intended arrival at Mariners Green, and by the time they reached the Port Providence Police Department downtown, their pre-arranged informal meeting time with a detective in the Missing Persons Unit had passed. They were told Detective Rourke was now in a briefing and wouldn't be available for at least a couple of hours. "Great," Marcus said, his frustration evident. "Wasted half the day on a hunch, and now we wait." They found a sterile waiting area. Marcus slumped into a plastic chair, pulling out his phone to distract himself. Clara paced, the adrenaline from her earlier pursuit giving way to a restless, gnawing anxiety. The image of Bishop Finch, serene and authoritative, kept replaying in her mind. There was something she was missing. She pulled out her own phone and scrolled through her contacts. Her finger hovered over a name, Detective Lena Hansen. Lena was an old friend from college, now a detective back in Havenwood. She'd been peripherally involved in the early days of Eliza's case, offering support and unofficial advice. They hadn't spoken in months. Taking a deep breath, Clara stepped out into the corridor for privacy and dialed. "Hansen." Lena's brisk voice answered. "Lena, it's Clara Donovan." A pause then. "Clara, how are you? It's been too long. Any news?" The unspoken question hung heavy in the air. "Not about Eliza. Not yet," Clara said, trying to keep her voice steady. "But I'm in Port Providence, following a lead, and I need a favor, a long shot. Do you know anything, or can you find out anything, about a Bishop Alistair Finch? He's visiting here, but he mentioned he was supposed to be in Havenwood around the time Eliza disappeared." "Bishop Alistair Finch," Lena repeated slowly. "The name sounds vaguely familiar. High profile? Travels a lot? Let me do some digging. It might take a while to check databases, especially across state lines if he's not local. What's your concern?" "I don't know, Lena," Clara confessed. "Just a feeling. He seems too smooth, too perfect, and there have been a few strange coincidences. Probably nothing. But my gut is screaming. Sometimes a gut feeling is all you've got, Lena said, her voice sympathetic but professional. I'll see what I can turn up, no promises, Clara, but I'll call you if I find anything. Even if it's just to say he's clean. Stay safe, okay? Clara thanked her and hung up, a small measure of relief washing over her. At least she was doing something. She walked back into the waiting area, the image of the little blonde girl in the minivan replaying in her mind. Not Eliza, but a child nonetheless, looking subdued, almost guarded. Another piece that didn't quite fit, another question mark in a day already full of them. The hours in the police station waiting room crawled by with agonizing slowness. Marcus dozed fitfully in the uncomfortable plastic chair, his face etched with exhaustion. Clara, unable to settle, paced the small area, her mind a maelstrom of conflicting thoughts. The brief, crushing disappointment of seeing the blonde girl in the minivan warred with the persistent, nagging feeling that Bishop Finch was somehow connected to her own nightmare. Her phone vibrated, startling her. It was Lena Hansen. "Clara? Got a moment?" Lena's voice was low, charged with an undercurrent Clara couldn't quite decipher. "Yes, I'm here. What did you find?" "Okay, so Bishop Alistair Finch. On the surface, squeaky clean. Respected clergyman, affiliated with a non-denominational charismatic fellowship, travels extensively for guest sermons, retreats. No criminal record under that name. Good reputation." Clara's heart sank a little. Another dead end. "Oh, okay. Thanks for checking, Lena. I guess my gut was wrong." "Hold on," Lena said. "That's the on-the-surface part. Something about your call, it bothered me. You know that feeling you get?" So, I dug a little deeper, cross-referenced some of his known associates, past ministry locations. And a name popped up in connection to a few, let's call them, financial irregularities investigated a decade ago in the Midwest. Charges were dropped, lack of evidence. The name was Silas Blackwood. "Silas Blackwood?" Clara repeated. "What does that have to do with Bishop Finch?" "Here's the kicker, Clara. I managed to pull an old DMV photo of Silas Blackwood from that period. And allowing for 10 years, different hairstyle, maybe some weight change, he's a dead ringer for the publicly available photos of Bishop Alistair Finch." Clara stopped pacing, her blood running cold. "You think they're the same person?" "I can't say for sure without fingerprint comparison, obviously. But the resemblance is uncanny. Blackwood vanished after those investigations. Finch appeared on the scene a couple of years later, a new persona, a new ministry. If it is him, he's very, very good at covering his tracks." Lena paused. "Clara, this is just a hunch based on a photo. I have nothing concrete to give to Port Providence PD from here, but if your gut is still screaming about this guy—" "It is," Clara whispered, her mind reeling. Silas Blackwood. The name sounded sinister, a stark contrast to the benevolent image of Bishop Finch. "Be careful, Clara," Lena warned. "If this guy is a con artist operating under a false identity, he could be dangerous, especially if he thinks you're onto him." Clara thanked Lena, her thoughts chaotic. Bishop Finch? Silas Blackwood? It was almost too much to comprehend. But it would explain the subtle inconsistencies, the feeling of unease she couldn't shake. Marcus was still asleep. Detective Rourke was still unavailable. Clara felt a desperate need for air, for movement. "I'm going for a short walk," she told the desk sergeant. "I'll keep my phone on." Outside, the city air felt heavy, indifferent to her turmoil. She walked without direction, her feet carrying her along the bustling sidewalks, her mind miles away, trying to connect the dots. Bishop Finch, the GeoView image near St. Jude's, the scent of lavender and vanilla, the guest house, the blonde girl in the minivan, and now Silas Blackwood. Her aimless wandering led her through a slightly more run-down commercial district, then into an area of older, institutional-looking buildings. She turned a corner and stopped dead in her tracks. Parked a little way down the street, in front of a large, somewhat grim-looking brick building, was the gray minivan, the one she'd seen leaving the Gables guest house. Her heart began to pound. Coincidence? Or was this city, this search, a tangled web of interconnected threads, all leading her somewhere? The building had a faded sign above its heavy oak doors. Providence Children's Haven, A ministry of respite. A religious-affiliated children's home or charity by the looks of it. Clara's breath hitched. She quickly ducked into a recessed doorway across the street, her eyes fixed on the minivan. Was the blonde girl inside? Was this where she lived? Or was this some kind of drop-off point? Minutes passed. Then, the driver's side door of the minivan opened. The same woman from the guest house, in the severe dark dress, emerged. Sister Agnes, Clara had heard the bishop call her. In a brief exchange at St. Jude's, she'd almost forgotten. Sister Agnes looked around, then walked towards the entrance of the children's haven. Clara held her breath, an overwhelming premonition gripping her. This was it. This was something. Sister Agnes returned a moment later, not alone. She was accompanied by a small group of children, 5 or 6 of them, ranging in age, all carrying small, identical duffel bags. They walked in an orderly, almost subdued line. The blonde girl Clara had seen earlier was among them. They were heading towards the minivan. Sister Agnes was opening the sliding side door. And then Clara saw her. Trailing at the very end of the line, a little taller than the blonde girl, her dark hair cut into a shorter, unfamiliar style, but with a way of holding her head, a slight hesitancy in her step that Clara would recognize anywhere. She was wearing a plain, institution-like gray tracksuit, not the vibrant colors Eliza had always loved. But as the girl turned her head slightly, catching the weak afternoon light, Clara saw her profile, the delicate curve of her nose, the determined set of her small chin. It was Eliza. Clara's world tilted. The sounds of the city faded to a dull roar. Her vision tunneled, focusing solely on the impossible, miraculous sight of her daughter. 2 years. 2 endless, agonizing years. And there she was, alive, yards away. Tears streamed down Clara's face, hot and unchecked. A sob escaped her, a raw, animal sound of disbelief and overwhelming, gut-wrenching relief. Elisa. Her legs felt like lead, yet somehow she was moving, stumbling out of the doorway, her hand fumbling for her phone. She had to call Marcus. She had to call the police. But first, she had to reach her daughter, Eliza. The name was ripped from her throat, a desperate, joyful cry that echoed down the quiet street. The girl in the gray tracksuit stopped. Her head turned slowly, hesitantly, towards the sound of her name. Her eyes, those familiar, beautiful blue eyes, widened. Confusion. Then, a dawning, incredulous recognition flickered across her face. Time stood still. For Clara, the world had just been reborn. "Eliza!" Clara cried again, her voice cracking as she broke into a run, heedless of traffic, of onlookers, of anything but the small figure frozen by the minivan. Eliza's eyes, wide and disbelieving, were locked on her. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She looked older, thinner, her vibrant spark dimmed but not extinguished. The unfamiliar short haircut couldn't disguise the unique curve of her cheekbones, the sprinkle of freckles across her nose that Clara had kissed 1,000,000 times. Sister Agnes, alerted by Clara's shout, whirled around, her face contorting in alarm. "Children, get in the van, quickly!" she snapped, her voice sharp and urgent. She began ushering the other bewildered children inside, her movements quick and panicked. But Eliza remained rooted to the spot, her gaze fixed on the approaching figure of the woman she hadn't seen in 2 excruciating years. Clara reached her, her lungs burning, her heart threatening to explode. She fell to her knees on the sidewalk, her arms outstretched. "Eliza, oh my baby, is it really you?" Tears were streaming down Eliza's face now. "Mommy?" she whispered, the word tentative, fragile, as if testing a forgotten language. You're alive?" The question, so utterly unexpected, hit Clara with the force of a physical blow. "Alive? Oh God, Eliza, of course I'm alive. We've been looking for you every single day." She pulled Eliza into a desperate embrace, burying her face in her daughter's unfamiliar short hair, inhaling the scent of her skin. Different, yet fundamentally, Eliza. The small, thin body in her arms was real, solid. Not a dream, not a hallucination. They told me you and Daddy were in an accident." Eliza choked out, her small hands clutching at Clara's jacket. "They said you went to heaven." "No, no, sweetheart, that's a lie. A terrible, wicked lie," Clara sobbed, rocking her daughter back and forth. The monstrous cruelty of it, the depth of the deception, was staggering. Sister Agnes, having bundled the other children into the minivan, was now trying to pull Eliza away from Clara. "Come along, child. You don't know this woman. She's confused." "Get your hands off my daughter," Clara snarled, shielding Eliza protectively, her grief momentarily eclipsed by a surge of pure, primal rage. Just then, a car screeched to a halt beside them. Marcus leaped out, his face a mask of bewildered hope, drawn by Clara's frantic, sobbing call moments before. A call where she'd managed only to gasp, "Marcus, I found her! Providence Children's Haven. Hurry!" His eyes found Clara, kneeling on the sidewalk, clutching Eliza. His breath hitched. "Eliza?" he choked out, his voice raw with disbelief. Eliza turned, her tear-filled eyes widening further. "Daddy?" Marcus stumbled towards them, his legs unsteady, and collapsed beside Clara, his arms enveloping them both in a crushing, tearful embrace. "Oh my God, Eliza, you're here!" "You're really here." The strong, stoic man Clara had known was undone, his body racked with sobs that mirrored her own. The reunion, so desperately prayed for, so long imagined, was a chaotic explosion of tears, choked words, and clinging embraces on a grimy city sidewalk. Sister Agnes, seeing her control over the situation disintegrate, made a frantic move towards the driver's seat of the minivan. "I have to call the bishop," she muttered, fumbling for her phone. "You're not calling anyone," Marcus growled, his grief momentarily transformed into a protective fury. He surged to his feet, blocking her path to the van. "And you're not going anywhere." As if on cue, the wail of sirens pierced the air, growing rapidly closer. Clara, in her panicked call to Marcus, had also screamed at him to call 911, to send police to their location, her words a jumbled mess of Eliza, Children's Haven, and that woman. Within moments, 2 patrol cars converged on the scene, lights flashing. Officers spilled out, their expressions wary as they took in the highly charged situation. A weeping family clinging to a child, another woman looking panicked by a minivan full of children, Marcus standing guard. "Police! What's going on here?" one of the officers commanded, his hand resting on his holstered weapon. "This is our daughter, Eliza Donovan," Clara cried, her voice hoarse. "She was kidnapped 2 years ago from Havenwood, Oregon. This woman." She pointed a trembling finger at Sister Agnes. "She's involved. She had her." The officers quickly and efficiently took control. One began speaking calmly to Marcus and Clara, trying to get a coherent story, while the other approached Sister Agnes, who had begun to tremble, her earlier composure shattering. The other children in the minivan, wide-eyed and frightened, were carefully coaxed out by a female officer who arrived as backup. They huddled together, looking lost and scared. "My name is Sister Agnes," the woman stammered to the officer. "These children are under the care of Bishop Alistair Finch's ministry, part of his Shepherd's Flock outreach. They are orphans, or from troubled homes." "This one isn't an orphan," Marcus roared, gesturing towards Eliza, who was clinging to Clara as if for dear life. "This is our daughter." The pieces were falling into place with horrifying speed. Bishop Finch, Silas Blackwood, the guest house, this Children's Haven, Sister Agnes. It was a network, a sophisticated operation built on lies and stolen innocence. "Where is Bishop Finch now?" an officer asked Sister Agnes sharply. Her eyes darted nervously. He was at the Gables guest house. He was preparing for a journey. He told me to bring these children to a meeting point near the airport. He was going to take some of them with him." "Take them where?" Sister Agnes shook her head, her face pale. "I don't know. He just said it was for their spiritual development, a special pilgrimage." Clara felt sick. This pilgrimage was undoubtedly an escape, a way for Finch, Blackwood, to disappear with his flock once he sensed any threat. Had her visit to St. Jude's, her questions, spooked him? "We need to get to that guest house now," Clara urged the officers. "He might try to run." The lead officer spoke rapidly into his radio, relaying the information about Bishop Finch, the Gables guest house, and the potential for him to be a flight risk with other children. Units were dispatched immediately. "Ma'am, sir," the officer said to Clara and Marcus, "we need you and your daughter to come to the precinct to give formal statements. We'll get child services here for the other children." Eliza refused to leave Clara's side, her small hand gripping her mother's with a desperate strength. "Don't let them take me again, Mommy," she whispered, her voice hoarse with fear. "Never again, my love," Clara vowed, her heart aching at the terror in her daughter's eyes. "Never again." As they were gently guided towards a patrol car, Clara looked back at the bewildered faces of the other children, now being attended to by social workers who had arrived swiftly. How many more Elizas were out there? How many families had been destroyed by this man, this wolf in shepherd's clothing? The trap, set by years of deception, was finally springing shut. But the full extent of the damage, the true nature of the monster they had unmasked, was only just beginning to reveal itself. The ride to the police precinct was a blur for Clara. Eliza sat nestled between her and Marcus in the back of the patrol car, a tangible, breathing miracle. Eliza's small hand remained locked in Clara's, her head resting on her mother's shoulder, occasionally looking up with wide, disbelieving eyes, as if to confirm this reality wasn't another cruel dream. Marcus, on Eliza's other side, stroked her hair, his face a tumultuous landscape of emotions, relief, fury, and an overwhelming tender love. At the station, they were ushered into a quiet family room, away from the bustle of the main precinct. Detective Rourke, the officer they had missed earlier, joined them, his expression a mixture of professional gravity and genuine human sympathy. He was a man in his 50s, with tired eyes that had seen too much. "Mr. and Mrs. Donovan, Eliza," he began gently. "First, let me say how incredibly glad we are that Eliza is safe and back with you. This is the kind of outcome we always hope for but rarely see." While officers and child protection services dealt with Sister Agnes and the other rescued children in separate rooms, the focus in the family room was on Eliza. A specialist in interviewing children, a kind-faced woman named Miss Davies, spoke to Eliza softly, patiently coaxing out her story. Piece by painful piece, the nightmare of the past 2 years unfolded. After catechism, Eliza began, her voice small and hesitant, Father Alistair came up to me. He said there was an emergency, that you and Daddy had been in a very bad car accident. Clara's breath caught in her throat. Father Alistair. That's what he'd called himself. He said he was a friend of Father Michael's, and he would take me to the hospital. I believed him, Mommy. He was wearing his special priest clothes. Tears welled in Clara's eyes. The betrayal, the manipulation of a child's innocent trust in a figure of religious authority was monstrous. Eliza continued, But he didn't take me to a hospital. He took me to a place with lots of flowers. And he showed me pictures of you and Daddy in frames. And there were two boxes. He said you were sleeping in them, with Jesus. A choked sob escaped Marcus. A fake funeral. The man had staged a fake funeral to convince an 8-year-old child her parents were dead. The sheer, calculated cruelty was unimaginable. He said I was special, Eliza whispered, looking down at her hands. That God had chosen me to be part of his special flock. We traveled a lot. To different houses. Sometimes Sister Agnes was there. Sometimes other children. He made us call him Father Alistair. He said he was our new shepherd. Did he ever hurt you, sweetheart? Clara asked, her voice trembling, dreading the answer. Eliza shook her head slowly. He would read us Bible stories. Sometimes he would get angry if we cried for our old mommies and daddies. He said they were in heaven, and we shouldn't be sad, or God would be angry too. He would take us to his room sometimes, one by one, to pray. He said it was to make our faith stronger. A cold dread settled in Clara's stomach. The implications of those private prayer sessions were terrifying. Detective Rourke made a subtle note, his expression grim. As Miss Davies continued to speak gently with Eliza, another detective entered the room and conferred quietly with Rourke. Rourke then turned back to Clara and Marcus. We apprehended Bishop Alistair Finch, or rather Silas Blackwood, as we now believe his real name to be, at the Gables guest house, just as he was preparing to leave. He had 2 other children with him, and luggage for several more. Relief, sharp and fierce, washed over Clara. He was caught. His assistant, the woman calling herself Sister Agnes, her real name is apparently Martha Kendall, a longtime associate of Blackwood, is also in custody. She's confirmed much of what we suspected. Blackwood has been running this operation for years, moving children across state lines, using a network of guest houses and these so-called children's havens as temporary holding places. He targets vulnerable children, often from church communities where he ingratiates himself as a visiting clergyman. He uses forged credentials, obviously, Rourke continued, creates a persona of piety and compassion. The shepherd's flock outreach was a front. These children were, in effect, his captives, indoctrinated and isolated. "We found a number of items in Blackwood's possession at the guest house," the detective added, his voice grave, including forged identity documents for himself and several children, significant amounts of cash, and this. He held up a clear evidence bag. Inside, nestled amongst other papers, was a child's blue coat, a vibrant sapphire blue, with a distinctive star-shaped silver zipper pull. Clara gasped. Eliza's coat. The one from the GeoView image. It was real. Her instinct had been right. "He kept it?" Marcus whispered, horrified. "Like a trophy?" "It appears so," Rourke said grimly. "We also found this." He produced another evidence bag. Inside was a small, framed photograph of Eliza, taken when she was 7, her gap-toothed grin bright and innocent. It was a photo that had been on their mantelpiece in Havenwood. Clara felt a wave of nausea. Had he been in their house? Or had he somehow obtained it? The violation felt profound. "The children he had with him at the guest house and the ones from the Haven are being looked after," Rourke assured them. "We're already working on identifying them and contacting their families. It seems Eliza is the one who has been with him the longest. The others were acquired more recently." The full picture was emerging. Silas Blackwood, a charismatic predator, had masterfully constructed a facade of holiness to gain access to vulnerable children. He preyed on faith, on trust, on the innocence of youth. He didn't just steal children, he stole their pasts, their identities, convincing them their families were gone, that he was their only salvation. "What about the private prayer sessions Eliza mentioned?" Clara asked, her voice barely a whisper. Detective Rourke's expression was somber. "Eliza will be medically examined, with your permission, of course. And she will continue to speak with Miss Davies. We need to be very careful and gentle in how we approach that. For now, the charges include multiple counts of kidnapping, child endangerment, false imprisonment, and fraud. Depending on what else we uncover, there could be more." Later, after Eliza, exhausted but refusing to be separated from them, had fallen asleep in Clara's arms in the family room, Clara finally felt the true weight of what they had uncovered. It wasn't just their personal nightmare. It was a web of calculated evil that had ensnared multiple innocent lives. The bishop, the shepherd, was a wolf, and he had been unmasked. Not by intricate police work alone, but by a fleeting digital image, a mother's unyielding intuition, and the faint, lingering scent of lavender and vanilla. The days that followed were a maelstrom of official procedures, emotional reckonings, and the slow, tentative steps towards rebuilding a shattered life. Eliza clung to Clara and Marcus, a small, traumatized shadow, startled by loud noises, prone to sudden bouts of weeping, and plagued by nightmares where Father Alistair loomed large. The world she had known for 2 years, a world of lies, indoctrination, and fear, masked by a veneer of religious piety, had been violently upended, replaced by a reality she was struggling to comprehend. Therapy sessions began almost immediately, not just for Eliza, but for Clara and Marcus as well. Dr. Ramirez, a child psychologist recommended by Miss Davies, was patient and insightful, guiding them through the treacherous terrain of trauma and recovery. She explained that Eliza's belief in her parents' death, so cruelly instilled by Blackwood, would take time to unravel emotionally, even if she now intellectually understood the truth. The Father Alistair persona had been her sole authority figure, her shepherd, and the betrayal cut deep. The medical examinations, thankfully, revealed no overt signs of physical abuse beyond neglect and malnutrition, but the psychological scars were profound. The private prayer sessions seemed to have been more about asserting control and psychological manipulation than anything overtly sexual, at least in Eliza's case, though investigations into Blackwood's interactions with other children were ongoing and deeply concerning. News of Bishop Finch's arrest and his unmasking as Silas Blackwood sent shockwaves through the religious communities he had infiltrated. Reverend Davies from St. Jude's in Port Providence was devastated, contacting Clara and Marcus to express his profound apologies and horror. "We were all deceived," he'd said, his voice heavy with shame. He was so convincing, so charismatic. To think we harbored such evil in our midst. Detective Lena Hansen called from Havenwood, her voice a mix of professional satisfaction and personal relief for Clara. "We're reopening everything here, Clara." Looking back at Blackwood's planned visit to St. Michael's, how close did he get? Did he survey the church, the children, before Eliza was taken? It seems likely. This wasn't impulsive. The thought that Blackwood might have stalked their community, their church, even their daughter, before making his move, sent a fresh wave of revulsion through Clara. As the investigation widened, more families were contacted, more children identified. Blackwood's reign of terror, it turned out, spanned at least 5 states and nearly a decade. Some children had been with him for months, others only weeks. Eliza was, as suspected, one of his longest-held captives. Each reunion was a miracle, but each story was a fresh horror, a testament to Blackwood's cunning and cruelty. Sister Agnes, Martha Kendall, was cooperating, painting a picture of a Svengali-like figure who had drawn her into his web of deceit years ago, promising her a role in a divine mission. For Marcus, the unmasking of Blackwood brought a complicated mix of emotions. His initial faith, already eroded by 2 years of unanswered prayers, felt shattered. How could someone use the trappings of religion, the very symbols he had once held sacred, for such profound evil? He found himself withdrawing, questioning everything. He attended therapy sessions with Clara and Eliza, but his silences were heavy, his eyes haunted. Clara, paradoxically, found her own battered faith taking on a different shape. It was no longer the simple, unquestioning belief of her youth. It was a faith forged in fire, tempered by unimaginable pain, yet strangely affirmed by the undeniable power of her intuition, by the series of improbable coincidences, the GeoView image, the scent of lavender, her chance encounter with Blackwood, that had led her to Eliza. She saw it not as a betrayal by God, but as a profound test and a revelation of evil hiding in plain sight, an evil that human instinct, a mother's love, had helped to expose. They stayed in Port Providence for several weeks in a more comfortable, extended-stay hotel arranged by Victim Services. Eliza needed stability, and daily sessions with Dr. Ramirez were crucial. Clara and Marcus created a cocoon around her, a haven of love and reassurance. They read her favorite old stories, cooked her favorite simple meals, though her appetite was small, and simply held her, letting her know wordlessly that she was safe, she was loved, she was home, even if home was currently a hotel room in a strange city. One evening, as Eliza slept soundly between them, she refused to sleep alone. Marcus turned to Clara in the dim light. "I was so wrong," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "All those times I doubted you, told you you were chasing ghosts. That day, with Finch, I almost stopped you." Clara reached for his hand. "You were trying to protect me, Marcus, from more pain. I understand." "But you knew," he said, his gaze searching hers. "Somehow you knew. I don't understand how. My faith, Clara, I think it's gone. How can God allow something like this? How can he let monsters like Blackwood wear his cloth?" "I don't have answers for that, Marcus," Clara said softly. "I only know that evil exists, and sometimes it wears a pretty disguise. But good exists too. Love exists. And that's what found Eliza. My love for her, your love for her, it never gave up. Maybe that's a kind of faith too." He squeezed her hand, his eyes suspiciously bright. The scars of their ordeal were deep, and healing would be a long, arduous journey. But in that quiet hotel room, with their daughter sleeping safely between them, there was also a profound sense of solace. They had faced the abyss and, against all odds, had pulled their child back from its edge. The fight was far from over, but for the first time in 2 long years, the future didn't feel like an endless expanse of darkness. It felt like the first, faint hint of dawn. Months later, the chill of autumn had begun to settle over Havenwood, Oregon. The Donovan family was back in their small house, the one that had been a mausoleum of grief for 2 years, now slowly, painstakingly, being reclaimed by life. Eliza's laughter, still tentative but growing stronger each day, was a melody Clara had thought she might never hear again within those walls. The trial of Silas Blackwood and Martha, Sister Agnes Kendall, had been a grueling ordeal. Clara and Marcus had testified, their voices steady despite the tremor in their hands, recounting the nightmare of Eliza's disappearance and the improbable miracle of her discovery. Eliza, deemed too vulnerable to face her captor in court, had given her testimony via a closed-circuit video link, her small voice clear and brave as she recounted the lies Father Alistair had told her. Blackwood, stripped of his pious facade, had been revealed as a narcissistic sociopath, a master manipulator who showed no remorse. He was found guilty on multiple counts and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Kendall received a lesser, though still substantial, sentence for her role as his accomplice. Justice, in its legal sense, had been served, but the true healing was a quieter, more personal process. Eliza was enrolled in a new school, with teachers aware of her past, and a small circle of carefully chosen friends. She still had therapy with Dr. Ramirez, now via video calls, and her progress was remarkable. The nightmares were less frequent, her trust in the world slowly rebuilding. She had started drawing again, her pictures no longer filled with dark, shadowy figures, but with bright colors, sunshine, and her family, always together. The sapphire blue coat, recovered from evidence, hung in her closet, not as a reminder of trauma, but as a symbol, Clara felt, of a mother's unyielding pursuit. Marcus, too, was finding his way back. The anger and profound disillusionment with his faith had not vanished, but it had softened. He found solace not in organized religion, perhaps not yet, but in the fierce, protective love he felt for his family, in the simple, everyday moments of normalcy they were rediscovering. He coached Eliza's fledgling soccer team, his cheers loud and enthusiastic, his pride in his resilient daughter evident to all. He and Clara talked more now, truly talked, their shared trauma forging a bond that was different, deeper than before. Clara often found herself reflecting on the improbable chain of events that had led them back to Eliza. The anonymous email, a shot in the dark. The GeoView image, a digital ghost. The fleeting scent of lavender and vanilla, a memory so faint it could have been imagined. Each a fragile thread, easily dismissed, yet together they had woven a lifeline. She knew some would call it divine intervention, others sheer luck. Clara believed it was something more elemental, a mother's love, an instinct so powerful it could bend the very fabric of probability. She had reconnected with Detective Lena Hansen, their friendship solidified by the shared experience of bringing Blackwood to justice. Lena had admitted that Clara's initial call, her gut feeling about Bishop Finch, had been the catalyst that prompted her to dig deeper than official procedure might have required. "Never underestimate a mother on a mission, Clara," Lena had said with a wry smile. One crisp Saturday morning, as golden leaves drifted from the maple trees in their yard, Clara watched Eliza chase butterflies, her laughter echoing in the clear autumn air. Marcus was raking leaves, a contented expression on his face. A sense of peace, fragile but real, settled over Clara. The gaping wound in their lives was still there, a scar that would always remain, but it was no longer an all-consuming void. It was a testament to their survival, to their resilience. "Mommy, look," Eliza called, holding out a perfectly formed crimson maple leaf. "Isn't it beautiful?" Clara knelt, taking the leaf. "It is, sweetheart. Absolutely beautiful." She looked into her daughter's eyes, no longer haunted, but shining with the light of childhood rediscovered. The journey had been one of unimaginable loss, of crippling doubt, and ultimately, of a faith redefined. Not a faith in infallible institutions or perfect leaders, but a faith in the enduring strength of the human spirit, in the unbreakable bond between a mother and her child, and in the quiet, persistent voice of intuition that, even in the darkest of nights, can guide you towards the light. The shadows of Silas Blackwood would always linger, a reminder of the evil that can exist. But the light of Eliza's smile, the warmth of Marcus's hand in hers, the steady beat of her own resilient heart, these were the truths that now defined Clara Donovan's world. A new dawn had broken, and she knew, with a certainty that resonated deep in her soul, that they would face it together, stronger and forever changed.